This week on the VC React podcast, Silicon Valley. First up, OpenAI is taking a stake in Thrive Holdings, a services roll-up already backed by one of OpenAI's biggest investors and built directly on top of OpenAI's models. Are we watching brilliant ecosystem design or a circular deal-making loop that locks everyone else out of the club? Next, the US government is writing a $150 million check into X-Lite, a lithography startup trying to become a homegrown alternative to ASML. Is this smart industrial strategy, or is America trying to run a playbook it can't stick with long enough to win? And finally, Apple has hired a senior AI leader from both Google and Microsoft to replace its retiring head of AI. Is this a true reset that puts Apple back in the AI game, or is it too late for founders to treat Apple as anything more than a nice secondary channel behind OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic? Let's react. Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the VC React podcast. Every week, we bring you insights and reactions from top VCs, LPs, and angel investors reacting to the latest news on Silicon Valley's startups, funds, and investment rounds. Let's jump into it with our guest for today, Joe Alalou, General Partner at Daring Ventures. In the video description, you can find more details on our guest, his LinkedIn profile, and a link to his company website. Our weekly news is brought to you by FWDstart, a twice-weekly newsletter that breaks down what's happening in the startup, VC, and tech space. Before we jump into the news, let's get to know our guest. Hey, Joe, how's it going?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me.
Great. I like your hat. What's that?
Yeah, so I met a guy who runs a consulting practice that helps creative professionals get acclimated to the AI world and how to grow their practice in a post-gen AI landscape, and had a really great conversation with him and decided to grab one of his hats. Thanks,
Awesome.
Brandon.
Great. Thank you, Brandon. Well, Joe, your LinkedIn bio says 3X community college dropout, ex-enterprise cleaning crew, former he seemed to be smart, or he seemed so smart, what happened guy? At what point did you decide, yeah, this is exactly what I want LPs and founders to see first?
Yes, it's funny. The way that I got to that point was I had a kind of a typical LinkedIn headline like everybody else. Ex-Lazard M&A, Columbia alum, et cetera, et cetera. And then I really realized, yes, that's all who I am, but that doesn't do such a great job of describing me because, yes, I did those things, but I don't identify myself just with thoughts. I was always thinking, oh, maybe I should change it, whatever. And I made a post about how VCs need to start thinking about people who come from outside the typical kind of paths, et cetera. And somebody commented, said, oh, that's awful rich coming from a guy who has ex-Lazard M&A, Columbia alum in their bio. So I was like, all right, yeah, you know what? Fine, I'll change it. And I'll put the other version. And that is a 3-time community college dropout, ex-enterprise undercar cleaning crew, and a former he seemed so smart one guy. Founders identify with it immediately. They know that I'm not performative and that I'm a gritty guy. And it's a great filter for LPs because LPs who read that and think, I need to know this guy are folks that we want to have a conversation with. LPs who read that and think there's a 0% chance I'm going to let that person manage my money, that gets us to a really quick no. And when you're raising funds, getting a quick no is sometimes as useful as getting a quick yes.
I totally understand and appreciate that. Yes, definitely. A quick no is much easier and better than 2 months or 6 months of just back and forth without any value. Well,
Exactly.
Let's move to Daring Ventures. What's the core thesis behind the firm, and what kind of founders or startups that attract or get your attention immediately?
Yeah, so our thesis really revolves around the fact that Gen AI has changed not just what it means to build companies, but who actually can build them. So we call them monomaniacal founders. These are people who have a one-track obsessive mind. These are insider operators who are building service and advisory software for manufacturing, logistics, and workforce problems. We call it the friction economy. These are sectors that are very process heavy, they're very paper heavy, and they're very people heavy. These require These are regulated. They require either service delivery or they require somebody's name to be attached to the work. We only do software, North America or United States focused right now. We all B2B, and we're raising a $10 million fund to back those kind of companies right now.
Okay, so let's get to the news. We have a lot to cover today. The first one is basically on OpenAI. They have just taken a minority stake in Thrive Holdings. It's a services rollup backed by Thrive Capital, which is already one of OpenAI's largest investors. This creates a notable circularity. An OpenAI investor is now building products with OpenAI inside them, while OpenAI becomes an investor in the operating platform itself. Thrive gains privileged access to OpenAI engineers and models to build industry-specific automations across HR, IT, back office services, etc. And OpenAI gains rapid distribution into more than 10,000 business customers or business clients without needing any heavy enterprise sales force. Let me start with this. Do you think OpenAI is really after these 10,000 business clients? Or it's mostly about owning the data and the usage pattern? They're looking for data to train their models for enterprise usage. What do you think?
I think the bull case on this is they get the opportunity to get enterprise data, enterprise workflow, usage patterns, et cetera, et cetera. The kind of bear case, I have a little bit more to say on that. The bear case there is that I think a lot of folks are already using OpenAI products for those enterprise workflows. And perhaps perhaps they find it hard to compete with a company like Google, they have a tremendous amount of enterprise data as it is already. And also a lot of businesses and a lot of use cases, they're just not that different. So I question how much value they would actually get from the data. I think my real bear take is if you had a real moat, you would not be having to buy your own lock-in and buy your own distribution. If you had a superior product, you put the API out there and you let the market win and you let folks use it. I think OpenAI and the model providers in general realize that these are becoming more of a commodity, that the access to the models is not something that, people are going to want to change between the different models. They're going to find a model that they like for this. They're going to find a model that they like for that. And I think that model lock-in is going to go away in the same way that AOL tried to build their own version of the internet. And you would search AOL keywords that was supposedly solving the search problem. I think that the models are going to go that direction. And I think OpenAI is at a severe disadvantage because they've leaned into the consumer. It's almost a tragedy of the commons isn't quite the right way to put it, but they got so much brand equity by being the consumer platform to the point nobody ever says ask Claude, nobody ever says ask Gemini. The people say ask Chat. Chat is like one of their friends now. They have this tremendous consumer platform, but they didn't lean into the agentic coding the way that Claude did. And they do not have the just insane enterprise distribution and scale of Google. And I don't know if you've used the new Gemini model, but it is outstanding.
Yes.
It is like mind-blowingly powerful. And it has already in the past 2 weeks or 3 weeks since it dropped, revolutionized some of our own internal workflows. So I see this as the beginning of a pattern of increasingly desperate Hail Marys from OpenAI to find product market fit in a commodity world when they have like extremely high valuations. Now, granted, I'm a pre-seed investor. I could be completely wrong about this, but that's my bear take on the situation.
On Gemini Pro 3, as a consumer user, although it's powerful, but ChatGPT still knows me better because I've been using it for, I don't know, a year or two. And it's trained somehow, or the memory is up to date with what I'm talking about and all of my background. So whenever I'm writing something or preparing for something or asking it for anything, for any help, it knows me very well. So that's the only missing point that I still go back to ChatGPT. I wish if there's a way where I can export all of these conversations and then import them to Gemini 3 so that it's up to date with me.
I think from a business use case, that's actually one of the things I like the most about Gemini is I feel like it is an impartial advisor, whereas if I ask ChatGPT or even sometimes Claude questions, ChatGPT is the one that I trust the least to be telling me the truth, or not necessarily the truth from like a hallucination standpoint, but don't cater the answer to what don't try to delight me with the answer. Give me the information or give me the analysis that I need. And I think Gemini does a very good job of staying impartial. And I hope that Google continues to stay in that lane with Gemini and not try to get to know me. Because when it's just like being at work, right? It's like you want your coworkers to know you to a point, right? Leave your personal stuff at home. And if that's the way that the models bifurcate, that's great. But the personal use cases, there's going to be, I actually had a really interesting conversation with the founder just yesterday, and he's building it's basically a BYO model company that lives in your iMessage. So it's an agent that you chat roll, but then the model that you plug in on the back end can do anything, and it'll get around. Apple is obviously going to lock in a provider for their ecosystem, but that model provider is probably going to be pretty tame because it's a consumer app. And if you want something that's either less conservative for whatever purposes you want, or conversely, if you want a model that is more conservative, that will adhere to specific political or religious beliefs, there is going to be a world of these models that people want to access for specific use cases. And the abstraction away and being the inference layer between users and models, I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there.
So back to this specific news, you mentioned that OpenAI is kind of desperate for distribution for enterprise users. It seems that this will not be just a one-off structure. It seems that they will be doing more partnerships with distribution partners. But when you see this loop, let's talk about the relationship between OpenAI and Thrive. As a VC, when you see this kind of loop, an investor in OpenAI is spinning up a services rollup built on top of AI, and then OpenAI takes equity in that company and embed its team into the company. Like they will be outsourcing engineers and product people. Does it feel like a smart ecosystem design, or is just circular deal making?
It's challenging because there is probably a lot of it's hard to really evaluate it fairly, because if I'm wearing my investor hat trying to put myself in the shoes of the folks at Thrive, they have to believe not only that OpenAI, given their investment in OpenAI, they not only have to believe that OpenAI is revolutionary, they also need to believe that their Thrive Holding roll-up strategy is also viable and revolutionary. And it really comes down to whether you think that these AI or whether you think that these kind of local business roll-ups, software, or whatever model that you try to apply to it, whether you think there's actually the amount of value creation there that would be, are they going to create so much net new value that it validates the investment that they've made in OpenAI? It also validates Thrive Holdings as an investment strategy. And then also, is that going to be enough, or is there going to be enough value remaining to be rolled up where everybody else who wants to do a roll-up strategy like Blackstone isn't like, oh, we need to buy from OpenAI now because they know how to do roll-ups. Is every private equity shop going to do that? Is there a world where they become a private market Bloomberg or a private company Bloomberg data play? It's really hard to say. I think that from the investor standpoint, though, you have to look at what are the incentives of the folks at Thrive, and they have to wholeheartedly believe that. Because if they don't, then they're not making good investments.
Yeah, but how does that affect the pricing power of this entity? Like for these 10,000 potential clients, they can't really negotiate anything, right? It's the dynamics are different now because the investor in their companies is also a partner with this OpenAI model, and they have to use this model. I don't know if they have to or not, but then if they're forced to use that model, they're also forced to accept whatever pricing is there, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. You're 100% right. They're forced to accept whatever pricing. I think that, again, wearing the investor hat, I think OpenAI is like between Thrive and OpenAI, they basically are in a bit of a standoff on pricing, right? Because neither can put each other out of business, right? So while they do need to accept whatever pricing, they're just they're ripping themselves off at the end of the day. So I think that in that kind of circularity, you just assume that it comes to some sort of equilibrium that is not going to destroy, OpenAI, but the investors can be in the driver's seat. There's a more cynical way of looking at this, which is that Thrive wants to protect their investment and that they think that OpenAI has really lost the plot and they're trying to show them the value of doing these deep enterprise integrations. And perhaps that's what they're trying to do. It's really hard to tell. This is why we don't typically like conflicts of interest in this business, because it's really hard to discern what's actually going on because there's so many different layers of motivation. It's hard to make sense of it.
They mentioned the conflict of interest in this case, but how about conflict of interest for everyone else who's building on top of OpenAI APIs? It's starting to feel like a bit of a closed club for OpenAI, its partners, because we're assuming there would be more than just this one partner. Are they going to exclude everyone else and start building their own products and sell to the potential clients?
I think when you look at the big three between OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google, there's only one that's really leaning into this. And it happens to be the one that at least I feel has really differentiated itself and has spent too much time it's a consumer product at the end of the day. That's what I think. I think it's an indictment of OpenAI's lack of viability currently as an enterprise player. The fact that they need to start embedding themselves in, because I don't think that Google is going to be as hostile to integrating with a broader ecosystem. And I don't think that Claude is going to be as hostile either, because they're really starting to carve out their own lanes.
Makes sense. So if you're advising founders today, how would you tell them to think about this? Try to get inside one of these tight loops, or deliberately stay independent and multi-model, so they're not boxed into one provider?
Oh, 1,000%. Don't get boxed in. Don't ride on somebody else's rails. The good folks over at Huffington Post and BuzzFeed and Vice Media can tell you about the pivot to video and what it means to ride on other people's rails. Be model agnostic. Do not get locked in to somebody else's ecosystem, and be nimble. Because if you're just locked into an ecosystem, you own next to nothing. And if your only value is your model provider, that is quite literally the definition of I'm just a wrapper on ChatGPT. If you're a wrapper on a wide world and wide ecosystem of models and putting together something that is greater than the sum of its parts, yeah, that's much better. And that would be like telling a restaurant, like, you're just a wrapper on the grocery store. Like, yeah, but also that's the entire point, is I take something, I put a bunch of pieces together, and that's the alchemy, right? That's where the value comes from. Yes, founders need to be model agnostic.
Okay, so the last question on this. So the Thrive Holdings has portfolio companies. These portfolio companies are mainly in accounting, IT services, etc. There are some startups that are trying to disrupt this and challenge those, let's say, incumbents. As a VC, would you feel comfortable investing in a company that's competing with Thrive's portfolio on top of the same OpenAI stack or any AI stack, knowing the model provider is now economically tied to the competitor?
It's a great question. I think the way that we think about investing in general is that the best distribution begins with a keen understanding of what the customer wants and having strong relationships with the customer. So I think that even though that there are some companies that are going to be economically incentivized and they're going to be able to basically offer stuff at a gigantic discount, I think that there's still room for founders to provide a tremendous amount of value in things that OpenAI and Thrive are just not. I think there's room for them to be disrupted in certain spaces because there are different ways to provide value, and it's not always about a race to the bottom in terms of cost. I think it's also, there's a lot of value in providing the right service at the right time. So I think that founders who are trying to disrupt are going to have a little bit of, or they're going to have a little bit of pricing power. And also there's just so much competition in the model ecosystem. I think that there's room for them to grow margins by providing high margin like onboarding and implementation that's really high touch, and then balancing that out with kind of services that are run on the cheapest and most efficient models. But it's really interesting because there's really two directions that this game goes, and there are marginal costs associated with the next unit. And I think in compute, we always assume that it's no, but we are bumping up against the laws of physics here. And is it going to turn into the water company where there's a marginal cost associated with delivering you your next gallon of water? Or is it going to turn into cell phone data where we went from having minutes and a limited number of text messages to they started putting in data caps, but the data caps are just like insanely high now, plus the Wi-Fi coverage. It can go two directions. And I think it really has to do with the marginal cost. And I studied history in college, so I know about the history of these things happening. I don't know about the laws of physics and thermodynamics and stuff like that. It remains to be seen what that cost looks like about providing compute like that.
Is there anything else you want to mention on this story before we move on to the next one?
No, I think it's extremely exciting. It's extremely exciting to watch. We're watching a kind of a tectonic shift in what it means to be a tech company. And we're also watching both the simultaneous birth and death of business models. And this could not be a more exciting time to be an investor. And I really look forward to being very wrong about many things and taking those as learning experiences, because nobody can predict the future. But the best way to learn is by sticking your neck out there and figuring out how not to be wrong the next time.
Talking about excitement, in this next story, some are excited about this and some are disappointed that the government is becoming kind of an investor. The US government is putting $150 million into Xlight, a young lithography startup developing alternative light source technology for next generation chip fabrication. So this is kind of the second phase of the CHIPS Act strategy after financing fabs. The focus is moving further upstream to the tooling that actually enables advanced nodes. The deal shows Washington is willing to act like a frontier tech investor in areas where maybe commercial capital alone cannot finance the development curve. As a VC, what's your reaction when you hear that the state is writing 9-figure checks? Do you lean in as a co-investor or move further down the funding stack where government isn't playing?
Yeah. So first of all, I think the government's a great co-investor because they're very well capitalized. They have certain levers and information rights that the rest of us as mere civilians don't have to exert influence over their investments. And it's interesting when they could be an equity investor, but when you own quite literally the capital, when you own the capital and all of the capital that sits on the cap stack flows through your own Federal Reserve, you have this superseding power. So it's interesting. And then they're very good partners. They're well capitalized. They have a lot of money. I think it gives me pause. I think from maybe a philosophical standpoint is that how much do you really want the government investing directly into companies? But at the same time, we actually have a really long history of this in the United States. This is how Silicon Valley was born, was from the defense ecosystem. Kind of prime defense contractors now have become so big and so bloated that it's really hard for them to be nimble and move the way that they need to. And by taking those cash infusions out of the kind of procurement process and moving them into direct equity investments, it allows the government to prioritize the intangible value of national security over what stuff that private industry simply is not going to fund. And I do think that is where the government actually has a gigantic role, is in funding the things where the capitalist is not going to see the marginal advantage because there's more money to be made in SaaS, quite frankly, than there is in pouring money into this deep R&D. And I think this is just a new 21st century expansion of something that has historically really happened in the United States. And it's the US government building technology that both benefits consumers in the tech industry, but also defends the country.
So I think it also happened with the space technology where the government funded NASA and started to help private companies to develop research and products for space technology. But my understanding was that the government is supporting indirectly by buying from those companies, not by directly investing them. I might be mistaken. Did that really happen?
No, you're 100%. You're 100% right. But originally, the government spun up NASA. It was a government entity, and then from there, that was 50 years of rocket scientists and 50 years of people who had space experience, who then trained the next generation and went off to start the space startups and stuff like that. Like that NASA SpaceX is not possible without the NASA DNA. This is a little bit different. I think that it's just not really the way that our government works anymore. I don't think it's politically viable to build a NASA of chips. And that's just not, I don't think that's politically palatable. So taking a direct equity stake in a business that could become the seed from which a future chip technology startups spring from, I think it's a more efficient version of what would have to happen if we built NASA for chips. Yeah, the government's buying from private companies in the space sector, but the space sector, the private space sector as it exists now, would not have been possible without that initial government infusion. This is different, though, where the government is not building the research entity. They're picking winners and losers in private companies. That's where it gets a little philosophically dicey, but the historical through line exists there.
What kind of risk is associated with this kind of deals? Is it like technical failure or political whiplash? Would the government be interfering with the private business? Or maybe it's crowding out traditional commercial discipline or something else?
It remains to be seen whether that was the best company for the government to invest in. We just don't know. That's something that comes out in congressional hearings like 5 years from now. And also, what levers do they pull? Because they have this tremendous amount of power. They don't just have power over the company itself. They also have power over its customers. And they can incentivize, whether it's Ford or GM or Lockheed Martin or whoever, to buy the technology that comes out of this company. Is that going to be the best technology that's on the market? Are they going to be throwing good money after bad money when they realize that perhaps was not the best investment, was a young company? Because young companies, they fail all the time. That's just the nature of the game, right? But if the government doesn't have the government's running a VC fund, if they don't have a broad portfolio to be like, okay, we bet on all the horses and then we're going to pick a winner and double down. Again, I don't know what they know about that technology. That is some of the most advanced tech out there. From a technical standpoint, I don't know enough about it. And from an information standpoint, they obviously have advantaged information. I don't know what they know that made them pick that. So I think that we need to just assume that the government made a decent bet, and we'll see how it plays out. But as they continue to try to grow that company, support that company, that's where we start seeing how much influence are they willing to exert on the private market. And that is where it can become quite problematic and risky to bet against them, because betting against them, they have power that Microsoft, Amazon, Apple would kill to have that kind of power over their customers. And when they get that kind of power, the government says, no, you're not allowed to have that kind of power. But the government is allowed to operate like a monopoly, like a monopsonist. They can do anything within reason, so they say. So yeah, there's a lot of risk there.
Yeah, it's not really structured as a sovereign wealth fund as we've seen in multiple countries. So there's not that team that's actually responsible for those investments. And investing in such a technology requires patient capital, right? But in the US, the cycles of elections and changing parties every now and then, every 4 years or maybe 8 years, would that affect the investment decisions? And would that also affect the portfolio companies that they're investing in? That's one point. The other point is this is the actual government investing. Again, not an investment arm. When there's a congressional hearing, the company, usually these are private companies, they care about their private information. Would the government be taking that private information and sharing it publicly because there is a question and a public hearing?
I think the way that they get around that, and again, this is just speculation, but I think the entire mechanism that makes this work is the fact that it's a national security priority, because that gives them, the private company, an unusual level of access to kind of whatever it is that they need in the government. And I think that just because of how vast the US government is and the amount of support that they're able to provide in everything from next gen technology to an understanding of like, how does the Army think about doing logistics for moving food for the National Guard, right? They have such a broad range of different things that can be tapped into. I think that they are relying on the professionals at the company to know, hey, this is who we call if we need this support. Because I think it would be very challenging to get an accurate representation if you were going to try to spin up a US corporate VC, sovereign fund, whatever. How do you get enough like operating partners from all of the different facets of anything the government touches? And it's more just government is on our cap table, like you should probably return their call or like return our call. I think that's the direction that it goes. But because it's all wrapped up in this national security thing, I think that kind of protects everybody, and it protects us from ever like quite finding out what happens. It'll be very interesting. We've done this corporate VC thing by funding R&D through the national labs and through the semiconductor technology that spun up Silicon Valley 80 years ago. It'll be really interesting to see how this plays out.
Okay, let's move on to Apple. Apple has appointed Amar Subramania, a senior AI leader who previously held major roles at both Google and Microsoft, to succeed the retiring John Gianandrea as head of AI. So, does this feel like a real reset moment for Apple, for Apple's AI strategy, or not yet?
I think they really missed the boat on the AI models. I think their opportunity, this is defensive, right? Because for shareholders, they need to show that they are participating in this game, because that's the expectation, that they're going to be competing at basically the highest levels, because that is a company that size, they need to go after massive markets. I think the core underpinning, and it's not really about the technology as much as it is about, think about Apple as a company. If there was a company that you wanted to have really like a true contextual understanding of you, Apple could not be better positioned. For most of us, since they spun up iCloud backup for your entire phone, they have 10 years, for other people, 15, 20 years of information about who you are, what you do, where you live, where you go, who your friends and family are, et cetera. That is the information that we actually do want access to, because we have so much information available at our fingertips now. People have 20, 30,000 pictures in their camera roll. How do you even go and find them? And a lot of the tools that people are building for themselves are like labeling pictures and organizing all of my text messages or notes on my phone. These are the things that you want Theory to be able to do. The problem is when you're a company that's as privacy conscious as Apple, that's just going to be a non-starter for them. So I think that the core issue for Apple is, do you want to compete on building a foundation or a model to drive that's going to be competitive out there with the world and is going to be something that lives inside of everybody's phone? Or are you going to partner with an outside company the way that they partnered with Google for maps and for search? Are you going to partner with an outside company to provide some of that value and then build your own kind of contextual layer, a contextual engine inside? The issue is that is extremely capital intensive just to be selling a small model, not even really selling it, right? You're building a model and then bundling it into your phones and your ecosystem. That's very different than going out and capturing the gigantic market that OpenAI and Google and Claude have been capturing. I think from a business standpoint, this was always going to be extremely challenging. It was just going to be a challenging place for them to play, because in reality, they already have the market. It's not going to sell more people phones. It's just going to be a nice to have, extremely useful, very nice to have feature that is only going to continue locking people into an ecosystem that they are already very much locked into. So when you think about the actual like the marginal benefit and what's the ROI on that spend, it just doesn't make any sense. So I think that if I'll start with Apple Intelligence, I think all of that is a symptom of business misalignment for a company that should not be playing this particular game right now, because it just doesn't make any sense for them. They're not going to charge you $20 a month to have ChatGPT only for your own phone, but then maybe also for your kids if they opt in, or anybody else who's like in your Apple like family ecosystem. But like, no, that's going to be a $5 a month baked into your iCloud or Apple Plus, whatever, or it's just going to come standard in the phone. The numbers just don't, the math doesn't math, as they say.
Well, I'm not sure if I agree with that, because I'm obsessed with the idea or the question how great companies die. I don't want to go to that extreme. Apple is not dying anytime soon, but we've seen how BlackBerry and Nokia died because they didn't adopt the new technologies that are out there, or they didn't believe they can die, but eventually they're kind of died. Not completely, the Nokia is still in business doing something else, but not phones. And then we have examples today of the same thing happening. Google caught up and they really focused on this, and now everyone is talking that Gemini 3 is beating ChatGPT. So they're all good. It's a company that keeps reinventing itself. It's amazingly they can do that. We have Microsoft that partnered with a big AI player and tried to do the co-pilot thing and all of that. They're kind of in between. But we have Apple, on the other hand, or the other extreme, where they missed the boat, as you mentioned in the beginning. And I think as a big tech company, it doesn't matter what you're really selling. You're a tech company, and AI is an essential part of the tech of today. If you don't have it, if you don't integrate it in your own systems and in your own products, you might be going to die soon. So as a VC, what are the signals that you look for in a company that tells you, oh, this company is catching up to a new technology trend, or these signals tell you, hey, this company might die in the next, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think it's really, it's hard to say as a VC, because I focus on early stage companies. As a former investment banker who dealt with late stage companies, I think that we agree in the sense that Apple is in a really tough spot. And unlike BlackBerry and Nokia, Apple has a $4 trillion market cap. And when you think about, they are accountable to shareholders, right? And if you think about, so Google, Google's business is designed to catch up to OpenAI and whatever, because OpenAI was trying to disrupt Google. Google is, their entire business is, we're the place you go on the internet to find stuff. That is the logical kind of next step. They have to play in that market. The ROI on that is basically you have to keep your market share. Microsoft, it's great for them to partner with the large labs because they are a cloud computing company, and the Azure business is going to benefit from everybody building stuff. They are, sure, they'll partner, they want to play in the ecosystem, but at the end of the day, they already pick the proverbial pick and shovel, right? That's the way that they're positioned. With Apple, you have to think about their accountability to, or at least the way that I see it is, you have to think about their accountability to shareholders, which is they cannot, investing in building a foundational model is not going to do more for their share price than share buybacks are going to, because part of Apple's ethos in your business model is having this lock into their ecosystem. And what would a Siri style ChatGPT look like? That would just be a web client for people who are already within the Apple ecosystem. Just, hey, here's a web client to access all the stuff that's on your phone. It doesn't represent there's no way that they're going to capture more market share like if they built a car.
OpenAI is now working on a new device that might eventually replace phones.
True. But at the same time, Apple also, what they have is they have the lock-in and they have the data, and they made the switching cost so difficult to get out of it. They have some protection. And I think that they're waiting for kind of the post-phone device. How are they going to become that post-phone device? And it's not going to be, they don't need to collect data by having people type into ChatGPT or whatever. They already have so much lock-in. They have a little bit of moat right now to develop whatever that post-phone device is going to be. I thought it was really interesting when they released the VR headset. It got completely panned by everybody, but I think that they're seeing the future the same way that the GUI replaced like command lines. I think they're seeing the future where it's not just about, okay, we have a screen that can display anything. It's you never know what kind of screen you want or what kind of screen you need. Sometimes you need a small one. Sometimes you need a gigantic one. Sometimes you need three or four of them. And sometimes you don't need one at all. I think that's the future that they're building for, which is very different than the LLM future. And that is the gigantic market that is their version of Google has to compete because they're the place that everybody goes on the web for finding answers to information. Apple is the device that unlocks the world around you. I think that's what they're waiting for, and going and building a foundational model to do this Me Too catch-up thing. I just don't think that's what they're well positioned for.
Okay, great. Well, with that, thank you so much, Joe, for joining us today. I really enjoyed this episode. I learned a lot from you personally, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun.